Welcome to the recorded version of Senior Nutrition and Mealtime, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Our presenter today is Molly Carpenter. Author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver, Molly Carpenter brings years of personal and professional senior care experience and training to families dealing with dementia care. In her current role, Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that the Home Instead Senior Care Network's 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a master's degree in education with gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And with that, I'd like to welcome our speaker today, Molly Carpenter. Thanks for joining us, Molly.
Thank you, Steve, very much. And welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. It's one of a really great topic that I'm really excited to talk about today because nutrition is such a hot topic. I mean, we hear all about it in magazines, on the web, in newspapers. And let's face it, you know, food and nutrition are big parts of our culture. We place a huge emphasis on our food and diets, with our grocery shopping, meal planning, going out to dinner and restaurants, and even a lot of our social events are centered all around food. I read this report the other day put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they analyzed 3 years of data and found that on an average day, we spend close to 3 hours each day eating and drinking. Now, half that time is spent on various activities like preparing or driving to a restaurant or, you know, making our meals, but 3 hours every day just on eating and drinking. So that leads me to what about our senior population? You know, well, aging can present some challenges to seniors' ability to maintain good nutrition. Things like chronic illness and declining eyesight or taste buds, even isolation can all affect nutrition habits. So knowing how important good nutrition and proper hydration is to all of us, even as a person gets older, it's even more important. So proper diet can have a huge impact on a senior's quality of life. So as we go through the slides today, you're going to see why nutrition is so important. So let's take a look at the objectives for today's webinar. During this webinar, what we're going to do is discuss why proper nutrition is so important. We're also going to look at the causes of malnutrition and some of the warning signs to look for when we're working with all of our senior clients. Then we're going to talk about tips and techniques to help older adults maintain proper nutrition, and this is all the way from food and meal to hydration suggestions as well, how to make shopping a fun event, and how to make mealtime even more fun. So, and then finally, we're going to talk about some chronic illnesses that can have an additional impact on nutrition, like Alzheimer's disease and diabetes. So first, let's talk about some of the physical factors that influence nutrition on the next slide. Let's start with chronic illness. You know, as seniors age, their bodies and the internal systems begin to slow and change. Illnesses can pop up that require a modification in what we can and can't eat. And often as we're aging, you know, we don't have the same get up and go that we did in midlife, and our metabolism has slowed. So when seniors have a chronic illness, you know, such as arthritis, for example, they have continual pain, which may affect their ability to shop and prepare food, you know, get up and actually want to go to the grocery store and then standing there to prepare a meal. That can be a challenge. And chronic illness may also suppress the appetite, even though these illnesses require more nutrients for the body. So it's really a tough situation when a chronic illness is present. Then chewing and swallowing, another issue that can affect nutrition. Dental problems are a common factor that can affect nutrition. Things like poorly fitted dentures, cavities, gum problems may affect the taste or the ability to chew. And dry mouth is also something to consider. Dry mouth is usually something due to a side effect of a medication or even a disease such as Parkinson's. I know I worked with a client one time a young gentleman in his early 40s who had Parkinson's and was a pretty advanced case already. And I was pretty young in my career, and he always asked, in his way, it was very hard for him to speak, but he would always want me to, when he was eating toast, for example, he would always want it soaked in coffee or soaked in juice. I mean, he always wanted extra moisture in everything that he was eating. So I've seen that firsthand, how somebody with Parkinson's and that dry mouth situation, it can really affect the person's nutrition. And then let's talk about absorption. The production of certain digestive enzymes and acids diminishes as we age, which makes it harder to break down the protein, and it makes it harder to absorb key vitamins such as B12, folate, and sometimes calcium and iron. So when the body can't absorb those crucial vitamins, it can impact the nervous system. When the nervous system is impacted, it can lead to that unsteady gait, some muscle weakness, alertness, circulation, all of those things. So it's another major concern, the absorption, when we're talking about nutrition. And then, of course, medications. A lot of our medications, they suppress the appetite. They might alter food taste. They may cause nausea or vomiting, kind of that upset stomach. And we know a lot of our seniors are taking multiple medications, so that can have an even bigger effect. Antibiotics and meds that reduce cholesterol or blood pressure, those are the types of medicines that can change the way food tastes, which can cause an issue. And then hospitalization, another physical factor that can influence nutrition. Our seniors are hospitalized a little bit more. All of that trauma and stress of being in the hospital can lead to that loss of appetite, and it can lead to weakness because, you're not feeling good. You just don't feel good, and you don't want to get up and move around, get up and cook, or go to the grocery store. And if you're not eating enough or not eating the right things, this can lead to a longer recuperation time from the hospital. And then as we age, our taste and smell begins to diminish. Sensory loss is a normal part of aging. And let's face it, food is all about that comfort and enjoyment. And so not being able to taste the flavor and smell all the good smells, this can lead to poor nutrition. And again, some of those medications can even decrease the sense of smell. And then lower activity levels. Loss of muscle and fat itself can cause loss of appetite due to changes in body chemistry. Not eating enough or the right things can also have a decrease in energy. And when you're up and moving around and exercising, you burn energy and you burn calories and you get hungry. You stimulate that hunger feeling. So low activity levels aren't really creating that sensation when you're not moving around very much. Okay, on the next slide, let's look at some of the social factors that can influence our nutrition. First one is depression. Now, we know that seniors can become low or down as they're aging, and this is due to a lot of things, which we're not going to get into all that today, but things like grief and loneliness or those illnesses that we talked about, even the lack of mobility, not being able to get up and move around, all those can contribute to depression. And, your mood does have an effect on how you eat and when you eat and how much you eat. Limited income is something else to consider when we think about the social factors that can influence nutrition. Lots of our seniors are on fixed incomes, which can cause them to choose lower cost food items. And, unfortunately, those items usually aren't the healthiest picks. They're more of the starches. And so the other thing to consider about the fixed income is the cost of medications. Choosing between grocery shopping and buying the really good meals or, and food items versus meds, medications will usually win out. And let's be honest, a lot of those nutritionist foods do cost more money in the store, which, by the way, just seems very unfair to society, but that's another topic. Reduce social contact. Obviously, another factor that can affect nutrition. Solitary life and loneliness, it has a big impact on our nutrition. Social contact has a positive effect on eating well, and it increases morale and well-being. I mean, think about in your own lives, how many times in the last week have you been out with a friend or a family member and it's related to a meal? I can think of two for me personally right off the top of my head. So eating out and is very social. All these meals and all of our social activities are around food. The other thing is to consider are restricted diets. Now, seniors are more likely than any other group to have dietary restrictions such as limiting salt, fat, or sugar. And these limitations are usually necessary for managing those chronic conditions, but they can also cause food to be bland or unappealing. So older adults may stop eating. And it's hard to adhere to these dietary restrictions, again, when you're out to eat or you're in this social event. So having that restricted diet kind of puts a damper on the whole food and the mealtime process. So knowing the physical and social factors that can influence the senior's nutrition, all of these can help you all spot an issue. But let's look at a summary of these signs on the next slide. First, again, another sign to think about is loss of appetite. If an older adult has always been a hearty eater but no longer eats as he or she used to, it's probably time to find out why. An underlying illness could be the root, or again, it could be that ill-fitting dentures or a tooth problem, pain while chewing, something like that. So it may be important to visit with a person if you notice this change and schedule a visit to the doctor even. And again, mood and changes in mood. You know, we talked a little bit about depression, but it's a pretty good sign of poor nutrition. And as we said before, being down can cause a person not to eat. So look for those different mood changes. Also, a thing to consider is, you know, a flighty or a spacey type behavior, you know, where the person just seems a little out of it. That is a signal of not eating properly or not eating the right foods or eating enough food. Another sign is a sudden weight fluctuation. A weight change such as losing or gaining 10 pounds in 6 months, this could mean that something's amiss. And it's hard to spot 10 pounds, you know, usually sometimes by looking at people, but look for cues in clothing choices. Sometimes we have to be a little bit of a detective when we're looking for nutrition signs. So you have to kind of look for those different issues. I think this is a big one too, and that's skin tone. When older adults are eating properly, their skin looks healthy and well hydrated, and they've got rosy cheeks, and they look good. Ashy or a dull looking skin could be a sign of a problem with nutrition. So, and a problem for illnesses as well. So it's just one of those, it's another sign to consider. And then we talked about, you know, a flighty and spacey behavior, but even cognition or cognitive issues, a change in cognition could signal kind of be a warning sign. Older adults who live alone might often forget to eat, or if they do have dementia or cognitive ailments, that can lead to nutritional deficiencies. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later when we cover Alzheimer's disease. And then we've talked about medications. You know, a lot of older people are taking more than 3 medications, and we've talked about how that medication can influence appetite and weight. So it's important, you know, maybe they check with, you know, you talk to a family member and you really check with the doctor about the medications and see if this could be a culprit and if there's any other options available. And then, again, we talked about hospitalization. Well, a recent hospital stay is a sign. So if somebody's just been in and out of the hospital, it may be important to stay involved and monitor the recovery to make sure and that they're eating properly. And as we've said before, poor nutrition can lead to that muscle weakness, which could lead to falls and fractures. So if the person is more tired and lethargic, this could also be a sign of poor nutrition. So if you spot any of these signs, what can you do to help? Let's look at some more ways, some more solutions that you can help on the next slide. I think the first thing is to start by really talking to the person. You know, if we really listen to what's going on in the older adult's life that may be contributing to or causing their poor eating habits, we are much more likely to be able to help generate solutions together with the person that can resolve the situation. Again, I kind of talked about being a little bit of detective and reading between the lines. So, you know, older adults are sometimes reluctant to talk openly about some of these issues because they may be embarrassed or they may feel like it's not important and they just don't want to deal with it. So we really need to be cognizant of that when we're discussing these types of situations that may be impacting their health or their quality of life. The other thing is that older adults, they may not understand or realize that some of the health issues that they're having could be easily cleared up with some dietary changes. So working together with them and taking the time with the person to really assess and doing it together to help find solutions is a great way to really understand the concerns and come up with great answers and good solutions. Having those open conversations with the older adults that we work with and potentially their family caregivers. In the case of addressing the nutritional needs of older clients, it may be appropriate to include family members in the conversation, especially if the client or the senior has a cognitive impairment. Or maybe the family's the one involved in the grocery shopping or the meal preparation, and or maybe the older adult just wants their family member involved. So really understand the role of the family when you're talking with your seniors. The goal of involving family is always the same. It's just supporting the independence and quality of life of an older adult. So everybody's out for the same mission there and not compromising their independence. You may have to suggest a doctor visit, especially if meds and medications are to blame, or if you suspect an illness. It's really good to recommend a doctor visit. Always, ensure that the most updated medication list is going with the person when they do go to the doctor. And I think it's always good to maybe jot down some of the signals you've seen of the poor nutrition, a little bit of a couple paragraphs on the situation and what you've noticed. It also may be appropriate to visit with a dietitian or a nutritionist if you suspect an issue. These professionals seem to be more available in the community. In our local grocery stores in my community, they now have dietitians on staff, and you can set up meetings with them to visit with them about any concern you might have. And so that might be something to suggest as well. Lastly, of course, if you think it's a dental issue or a jaw problem or tooth pain or anything like that, you definitely want to suggest a visit to the dentist. So in addition to consulting medical and nutritional professionals and maybe even the dentist, there are many things that you can do to educate and support the seniors that you work with every day, and educating them on eating properly and having better nutrition. So before we get to some of those tips and techniques, on the next slide, I want to look at the nutritional guidelines for seniors. Now, first of all, right off the bat, the first one is sodium. Reducing sodium is very important for seniors. It's actually important for all of us, but preventing that water retention and sodium can lead to high blood pressure. So it's one of those important guidelines to make sure the seniors that you support understand. And then fat intake, monitoring the fat intake. I think the important thing here is educating seniors about good and bad fats. that distinction is pretty new in the last 10 years or 20 years, I don't know how many years, but where we really start as a society and a communities, we really start to understand good fats from bad fats. So it's really important to make sure that information is top of mind to seniors. So fat from olive oil or avocados or salmon are the good fats and can help prevent, the heart disease. And it helps with the controls that sort of bad cholesterol and raises the good cholesterol levels. So just some of that basic education that we've all come to understand pretty well. Maybe our seniors aren't understand the differences in the fats and the different cholesterol levels. Calcium, it's very important to bone health, as you all know. So it's, again, another education to tell the senior clients and the seniors you work with how important calcium is. Maybe even suggesting other ways to get calcium besides just milk if a senior doesn't love milk. So there's lots of ways to do that, which we'll discuss later on. And then increasing fiber intake, consuming more fiber. Biggest reason is for constipation or any kind of issues with your stomach. This is a very good recommendation. And then another guideline is that exercising regularly or participating in a regular physical activity. 30 minutes 3 times a week is ideal. There's lots of different ways that they can get this activity, but really helping them understand that little bit of physical activity is necessary and really benefits nutrition. Now, these guidelines, they may look very familiar to you all because they're similar to what our doctors and the community in the world is telling us that we should do. So they're really are very similar guidelines. So I think that's really interesting when I was reading this slide over. Healthy eating can also help keep that older person's body and mind sharp and extend their quality of life. So let's look at, we've seen the special nutritional needs that these seniors have. Let's talk about hydration guidelines on the next slide. Now, dehydration has been associated with many elderly health issues, including that confusion, impaired cognition, falling, constipation, those types of things. So some guidelines for hydration are have fluids at every meal and snack. I think it's natural we always have fluids at a meal, at a main meal, but think about snack times as well. It's very important. Always keep water close or within reach, and maybe you get a special water bottle that's a person can use every day. You want to make sure it's easy to use, though, and carry, not being too big so that they can are able to lift it and manage it. So just a good suggestion of maybe a special water bottle. And then enhance water. Add a splash of white grape juice or cranberry juice to water, or we've all started to see lemons and limes in our waters. I've seen cucumbers in waters. I think that's, again, a relatively new concept for seniors. I know with my own experience, putting lemon in the water was something new back when I worked in the facility, and when we started to do that, people did enjoy it a little bit more. It was just something different and added a little bit of a flavor. The other thing to consider is maybe the sparkling mineral water. That might be a good way to increase the hydration water intake. The other thing is a filtered water pitcher. They make these now. You can keep them in your fridge. They come in various sizes, but you don't have to get the whole system on your water in your house now. You can just have this water pitcher, which I think is a very interesting, great concept. And just having a pitcher of water, even if it isn't the filtered one, just a pitcher of water in the refrigerator at all times for cold water. As a young kid, my grandmother always had a pitcher of water in the fridge. And I remember finally one day asking her, Grandma, why do you put water in the pitcher in the fridge. Why don't you just get it out of the sink? And she simply said, because cold water tastes better. So it's just one of those things. It's simple. It's such a simple idea, but it really does work. And then watermelon and other fruits and veggies that are water-based, those fruits and vegetables, really important and a good way to get your water and your hydration in. And then consider hydrating and water-friendly snacks, things like Jell-O, even some soup, pudding or popsicles or smoothies, the Ensure shakes or those nutritional shakes that we see out on the marketplace today. All of those things, again, helping ensure that they're getting good hydration and some good nutrients in some of those products. And then, of course, we want to always talk about the fruit juice. I think a lot of seniors, they love that morning fruit juice. If it's orange juice or cranberry juice or apple, really watch which ones they're purchasing and buying and using. You know, a lot of them have lots of sugar in them or they're syrupy. So just look for the ones with reduced sugar and reduced. It just may help. This is an education thing about the differences between the real fruit juice versus the ones with a bunch of sugar in it. And then coffee intake. And this is, again, something good for all of us. A lot of us drink coffee all day long. Coffee, it's not hydrating, it's dehydrating. And so with seniors, we have to make sure there's not too much coffee intake, and they're counting that as the water intake for the day. And then if there's ever a concern about, incontinence, which could be, really encourage people to drink earlier in the day. That's just try to consume as much water as you can during the day so you don't have to worry about it at night and worry about any accidents or anything like that. So preparing and cooking meals is an important component to nutrition, and we always want to involve the senior if possible. So on the next slide, let's look at some cooking tips. Now, obviously, having all of this good food doesn't do an older adult any good if they don't enjoy cooking or eating it. And so we've got to make mealtime fun. I read an article by a nutrition expert at the University of Maryland, and she suggested making eating a happy event. Sometimes we focus too much on what we can't eat, and we don't give enough attention on what food represents to us. Food really is the core of our lives. It's about aroma, it's about color, feel, texture, the socialization. All of those things makes a meal enjoyable. So really take some time and focus on how to make mealtime more fun, even if it's fun napkins or fun tablecloths or, lots of ways to make mealtime fun. And then we've got to watch out for the empty calories when we're cooking food. So those are things like solid fats and added sugars, the things that have no nutrients, and those are sodas. But when we're cooking, when we're making or baking sweets, or we cook a meal and we have chips as a side, there's just some things to watch out for those empty calories. Educating seniors on empty calories and what that means is really important. And then soups. It's a really good way to get some great nutrients. They're usually relatively easy to put together, and they're really good for people that have mouth or gum issues. Obviously, foods that require less chewing, such as soup, is a really good idea. Soups make great leftovers, and they do help with the hydration, again, if they're broth-based soups. And then I love this one, preparing nostalgic meals. Familiar meals and meals that are so important to the family can really help seniors, engage in the eating and cooking process and really keep them connected to their past. It brings back those really good memories and those happy times. And I had a client one time, a senior who was Italian. She's just a lovely, lovely woman. And we called her Nan, because that's grandma in Italian, but Nan, she was depressed. She lost her husband. Her husband had Alzheimer's disease, and she was very much down in the dumps. And she was an excellent, excellent cook, and she just decided that food didn't taste good to her anymore, and she was just, didn't want to cook, didn't want to do anything. And so we talked to Nan about her lasagna, which she's famous for. And so we invited her to help us make lasagna. And we really tried to, it was a teaching opportunity, which she wasn't really interested in. She was, just, you could never do it right, good enough for her, right? But the fact that she was sitting there and we were using her recipe and we were going through all the steps, she eventually got connected into the process, and she would start giving us tips and try this and do this and wait for this. And it was actually a really long process to make this lasagna. And in the end, she ate it and she loved it. And she was excited about how good this lasagna was. She was excited because it was so good. We loved it so much, and we kept telling her how great it was. So thinking about things like that is looking for that special family recipe or some of those recipes that can really engage somebody back into, wanting to eat again and getting excited about eating again in a meal. I think this is another fun one, is mixing up meals. Many people love to have breakfast any time of the day, but you don't think to do it. And especially seniors, they love breakfast. I know so many seniors that breakfast is their favorite meal. So remind them that it's just, it's just an idea that some foods should be eaten at one time of the day versus other foods. So it doesn't matter. We could always have breakfast for dinner or lunch or whatever it is. So, you may even want to try like a vegetable soup or a tuna sandwich for breakfast. I mean, that's not unheard of, or an omelet or a bran muffin or fresh fruit for dinner. The goal is a variety of healthy foods, and it just doesn't really matter what time of the day they're eaten. All right, let's keep looking at these tips on cooking on the next slide. As we know, variety is the spice of life, and that's really true with food. So encouraging seniors to plan and prepare a variety of foods can really help them stay interested in eating. So if foods are tasting too bland, it's okay to suggest to them to try to get some natural flavor enhancers. Some good choices are olive oils, vinegars, garlic, onions, and various spices. Maybe even like cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. These spices are also good for folks that need to cut back on salt. So the goal is to move in the right direction, not to perfect their eating. So even we've seen Mrs. Dash in the store, all these different spices now. These might be helpful to pick up or show seniors if you're out grocery shopping with them. Talk to them about some of these new spices that are available. I've also seen those flavor packets or meal starters in the store. Sometimes they're dry packets that can enhance a meal for flavor. Again, got to watch out for the sodium in those. But there's even the cream cheese starters is another example I've seen in the store, where if one of them is for chicken enchiladas, for example, and if you put the chicken in the pan and then you just put this cream cheese in with it, you get a chicken enchilada mixture. So lots of new ideas out in the store that seniors may not be aware of. The other benefit is that this also might mean that they're more likely to get their nutritional needs met because they're choosing from a variety of foods and within a variety of food groups every day. So variety is really, really important. Another great idea to help older adults improve their nutrition is to start to assemble healthy snacks at home. We've seen these, even in small baggies such as nuts or seeds, just having those on hand at home, even having the little cups of low-fat cottage cheese or lots of fresh fruits and veggies at home. Those are important snacks to consider rather than buying less healthy and more expensive prepackaged and processed snacks. I mean, I know the bag of Oreo cookies is delicious, but in moderation, that might be okay. But having some of these other snacks on hand, that might be very helpful in choosing and making the right choices at home when you want a snack. Also, another great idea is the person themselves or maybe a family member can also do some batch cooking. So, for example, maybe you cook a large pot of spaghetti sauce and you divide it into small portions and in little containers and label them, and you freeze them to use later on in the month and later on when they want to have use the spaghetti sauce again with spaghetti or whatever else. Batch cooking is a great idea if to use when for leftovers and for planning for the whole month. But another idea is to also take advantage of planned leftovers. So if you're cooking a roast, for example, you serve the portions that are needed for the amount of people at the meal, and then you freeze again that pack and some of the vegetables. And either, you use it as roast in the future, or maybe you use that, pull it out of the freezer and make a nice soup with that. So there's lots of ways when you're planning meals to incorporate those for future meals by making a little bit extra and being organized and coming up with some good ideas. You can kind of see that planning and organizing are really key to good nutrition habits. Okay, so cooking's really important, but so is the grocery shopping. So on the next slide, let's talk through some tips for successful grocery shopping with older adults. Now, as basic as it may sound, many people do not know how to make trips to the grocery store more organized and productive. And of course, this is true if someone has never done the grocery shopping or meal planning and maybe now is forced to because their spouse has died, for example. So it seems really like the easiest thing ever, but there's a lot of tips that we can do to encourage the seniors and their family members on how to improve grocery shopping. They're going to sound basic, but put yourself in the shoes of an older adult who may have never had this role in their lives, or they've never thought about it that way. So a little bit of simple guidance can go a long way. And you think about the first one is make a list. Again, sounds really basic, something a lot of us probably already do. But if you can kind of make a meal plan for the week and figure out which day you're going to have which meal, and you start making a list, it really can reduce the time and money we spend on food shopping. Sometimes you go to the store, you don't have a list and you don't have a plan, and you buy things that you may not never use for that week for food or for the next few weeks, and it will go bad, and you wind up with things that aren't necessary. And so having a list and staying organized is a number one tip for grocery shopping. The other one is that I know we've all heard this one before. We've probably experienced the consequences of doing so. I know I have, but it's best not to shop when you're hungry. We know that people are much more tempted to buy things that we wouldn't normally do when we're hungry. So if you take the senior you're caring for or working with to lunch, maybe after lunch you go to the grocery store, or after breakfast, after you kind of have that full stomach. We're all tempted to buy more of those things we don't really need or shouldn't have when we're starving and we're grocery shopping. The other thing is reviewing store ads and clipping coupons and organizing them at home. This is just, it's great because clearly shopping with coupons can save people a lot of money. And in these economic times, this is especially important. And knowing that you're saving money, it might help reduce the stress of shopping a little bit and the cost of what it's going to cost when you go to the grocery store. And I think it's another great way to help people get organized about what they may have and what they may want to cook that week. And it just gives you it's an activity, and it's another way to feel useful and relevant in your everyday life. So it's as simple as clipping coupons. The other thing is signing up for the grocery store bonus or discount cards. We've all seen those. This can really help with savings again, and it allows the person to get all the advantages of the grocery store specials. I remember, again, thinking about my grandmother, the first time we went to a grocery store where I presented a discount card. She just had no idea what that was. She thought it was a credit card at first. And I said, no, this is a special card to get all the discounts. And so it's just, again, a pretty new concept, maybe in the last 10 years, that a lot of seniors may not be aware of. So encourage them to sign up for that card. And then, again, so this is another one we've heard a lot about, is shopping the perimeter of the store. That's where most of the fresh and healthier foods are located, your produce and your veggies and all of those different things. The inner aisles have more of the prepared and processed foods. And then you also want to encourage older clients to try store brands. A lot of them are used to their brands, but we know that the store brands are usually just as good, and they're usually a little bit less expensive. The other important thing is to encourage these seniors, to try new foods. Try ethnic alternatives and try something new. Maybe encourage them at least once a week, or if you can't get them to do once a week, maybe once a month. And because this has gotten a little bit easier. A lot of our grocery stores now have those special food sections, and they label everything so well about unusual fruits and vegetables. And some even have those recipe cards on how to prepare those special things and, to prepare them well so they'll taste good. Again, I think of one of my first experiences in this industry working with a senior were tacos. Is as simple as, and how great we all love tacos. Well, I remember this client, her name was Marcy, and she just had never had a taco in her entire life. She was 85 years old when I was working with her. And I said, well, let's try tacos, or let's try making tacos. And sure enough, she just thought this was the greatest thing ever. And it was something she'd never had before, but it became a staple in her meal planning. Now, those hard shells sometimes are hard for seniors, and so we did use the soft shell tortillas, and we got the lower fat ones, of course. But even that sparked interest for her to even think about, we introduced chicken into the taco. So just think about it from that perspective of a lot of seniors, they may not have ever had a taco. They may not are very familiar with, Chinese food or sushi. I mean, there's lots of different things that you can encourage them to try new foods. Now, as we talk about the grocery store, there's a lot of staples that would be important. So in thinking about the tips of the grocery shopping, there's some important staples that we should encourage seniors to always have on hand. So let's take a look at those on the next slide. Now, a lot of these may seem like common foods for any healthy diet, but these foods hold special nutritional value for older adults, and they can be used in a variety of recipes. So we start with oatmeal. It's a great source of fiber. Oatmeal has also been shown to lower blood cholesterol and may reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke. Obviously, very important things to older adults. Eggs is the next one, only 75 calories a serving, and they've got 13 essential vitamins and minerals, including that vitamin D, which is important to absorb calcium, which we all know is needed for bone strength. And eggs are inexpensive, and so it's a great staple to always have on hand. Yogurt, again, rich in calcium. Yogurt can contribute to the calcium requirement needed to prevent osteoporosis. It's also got that good bacteria in some of the yogurt, which may help people with those digestive problems. And then think about the new Greek yogurt that's out there. A lot of that Greek yogurt has a lot more protein than our traditional yogurt. So helping the senior get the protein that they need to in a day is great to try the Greek yogurt as well. Blueberries. We love blueberries. They're among the top fruits and vegetables for antioxidants. There's also, you've probably read a lot about the research on Alzheimer's disease and that blueberries may improve memory and coordination. Now, I know there's just a lot of studies on that, nothing 100% proven, but it's a great fruit. They can be purchased fresh or frozen. Watch again when you're purchasing the frozen ones that they're the natural blueberries. And then apples is another important fruit. The pectin in apples lowers the body's need for insulin, which can help with diabetes, the management of diabetes. But the thing about apples, hard to eat sometimes, especially if people have a dental issue. But we've all seen those packets now in the grocery stores of the sliced apples. So apples is a great staple to always have on hand. And then I think the next one, fish, is another great staple. Bluefish or salmon, trout, tuna, they're all low-fat, high-protein, and have tons of nutrients. The American Heart Association recommends fatty fish twice a week to improve health. Now, I know twice a week would be a lot to encourage, but even if you could try for once a week or once every other week to encourage a senior to have that fish on hand and to eat fish. It can also help with that brain health. There's been some research around fish and the benefits of improving brain health. Chicken's another great staple to have on hand. It's a great source of protein, and it contains less fat than most meats. Broccoli is one of those great veggies to have on hand. Got a lot of nutrients, the vitamins K, C, E, and B, calcium, iron, and broccoli has been found to protect against cancer and heart disease, stroke, and macular degeneration. Sweet potatoes is another great one. Again, my grandmother loved sweet potatoes, but she loved it because she put brown sugar on top. So encouraging those spices again, maybe even the Mrs. Dash spices on those different veggies might be helpful on the broccoli and the sweet potatoes. And then rice, make sure when we're talking about rice, it's a great complex carbohydrate. It digests slowly, and it allows the body to utilize the energy release over a longer period, which is nutritionally efficient. We got to watch out for the rice, making sure it's the brown rice and the whole grain rice. And then dessert. Again, we can't live without our sweets, but a great suggestion or important staple to have on hand would be the dark chocolate because it's a little bit better for you than the regular chocolate. Again, moderation is the key. Okay, so even though we have lots of tips here today, and we've talked about tips on helping to get seniors out to shop and cook, there might be some seniors that just still can't do that. So there's some important resources to look at. Let's look at that on the next slide. We've seen a lot of our grocery stores now have shopping and delivery services. So that might be an option to consider. Also, we talk about our neighbors and friends. Especially if you're visiting with family caregivers and they're the primary person caring for this loved one, they might be managing a full-time job and kids at home, and they're stressed out, and they probably have friends and neighbors that have said, what can I do to help? Well, this is something. Even we talk about that batch cooking, even if a neighbor made one meal a week or one meal a month, and it caused or allowed for a couple of sets of leftovers, it's okay to ask for help. I think that's the message to really send to the family caregivers. There may be home care services available from a professional firm. Some of the caregivers that come into the home, they can do shopping and meal preparation for a small fee. And Meals on Wheels is another great option that provides nutritious meals to homebound, disabled seniors who aren't able to get out. Some just have a lunchtime meal, some have a lunch and dinner. It depends on the state and the programs. And there's usually a small fee based on the individual's ability to pay. And then finally, another thing is the companionship. That would help with companionship is to think about those senior centers or the church or the congregation, or maybe even high school or senior meal programs. There's a lot. I would start by contacting the local senior centers to see if there's any types of programs. Even encouraging seniors and the people that you care for, having them invite friends over on a regular basis or do a potluck or even a weekly coffee or breakfast with a certain family member or friend, just to sort of get on a more regular schedule of these great social meals. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk on the next couple of slides, the next slide, about a few diseases that may affect nutrition even more, and that's diabetes. Now, the American Diabetes Association, more than 18% or 8.6 million Americans aged 60 and older have diabetes, and the prevalence of disease increases with age, and the risk of developing type 2 diabetes also increases with age. So it's a unique challenge for seniors. And for those with type 2, age causes a decline in insulin production and an increase in glucose intolerance. Older Americans are also more likely to have complicating conditions that we've talked about, some of those chronic illnesses that can complicate this as well, like hypertension and kidney problems. Now, unlike a diet that involves what you can't eat, nutritional management for diabetes usually involves dietary changes that balance moderation, carbohydrate control, and healthy eating choices. People with diabetes need to focus on foods that are high in fiber and nutrient dense. This is those plant foods and dairy foods, lean meats and poultry. And you know, there's lots of information on the Diabetes Association's website. There's a great PDF document that has tons of tips there. Some of their tips include starting meals with salads, of course with the salad dressing on the side, and broth-based soups, and encouraging seniors to choose veggies and fruits as sides instead of those fries and things like that. Avoiding buffets, and maybe even a great tip was sharing desserts. Those are some of the things on the American Diabetes website. Now, the next area on the next slide is I want to talk about the challenges that when a person has Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And these are just some tips that we've put together to help with that as well. So eating and drinking may change, habits may change with dementia. You may have somebody that wants to eat all the time or somebody that doesn't want to eat. Getting somebody with Alzheimer's disease to drink enough liquids can be very difficult. Swallowing may become a problem. Use of appliances could be a concern. So this makes nutrition a challenge. So just a few tips. Again, we talk about food traditions and those nostalgic meals. Continue them for as long as possible. Encourage the family to make those meals or engage the person in making those meals, sitting and watching like I talked about or having them make the meal if they can, just always including those special meals. Finger foods is another way to modify or simplify the meal. Again, if you do this or take on this strategy, it's important to do it out of the person's sight line just to help preserve that dignity. Simple table settings. I think this is one we often overlook. We want to keep table settings simple and avoid pattern dishes and placemats and tablecloths. Patterns can be confusing as the vision worsens or distracting. Consider serving just one dish or food at a time. So if you're having soups and sandwiches, serve the soup first, then serve the sandwich. Look for ways to create contrast. I think this is an interesting one that people might not think about very often. But think about this. If you have a white plate and you put a chicken breast and some mashed potatoes and some corn on a white plate, the contrast, you'll see the corn, but you will not see the other two, the chicken and the potatoes. So consider using colored plates. You may have to be descriptive when the person, if they don't recognize what they're eating, you may want to describe each item on the plate. And then modeling is another important tip. especially when the person may be unable to use utensils. So you can show them. If that doesn't work, you may have to help guide their hand, putting the spoon in their hand and guiding it to their mouth, for example. Or another way to model is, let's say they have crumbs on their shirt. You could start wiping your shirt, hoping they model what you're doing. It's just kind of like what we do with our own families and friends when we have something on our shirt. So modeling, real important. And then knowing food preferences and routines. I think this is probably the number one tip when I think about working with somebody with Alzheimer's and dementia. If you know what they love and you know when they eat and what they eat and what time and all of those things, keeping that routine as familiar and as the same as possible is the key. All right, on the next slide, let's look at some of the resources that we've talked about today. We've talked about the registered dietitian. There's a few websites there you can see on the slide: the National Institute for Health, the USDA, which is nutrition.gov, and the N4A, which is Meals on Wheels. I also talked about that American Diabetes Association. Their website is great as well. And we're getting close on time, but I do want to just share one more story on the next slide. And I'll shorten the story for you all. But it's just a great story of a gentleman. When I worked in a senior living community, this gentleman came into the community who was confused. He just was not himself. He had arthritis. He was depressed. He seemed lethargic. He was forgetful. And the daughter was telling he's missing appointments and he's not hanging out with his friends as much. So she moved him into the community. And within a month, this person, Jim was his name, was a completely different person. His color was back. He had a group of guys he ate every meal with. He started a weekly card game with the guys. He did not need queuing anymore. The nurses used to have to queue him to come to meals. Now, and our nursing staff and our medical director, us giving the medications to him helped, but they attributed that 90% of his change was nutrition. He was eating 3 meals. He had access to snacks. He had his energy back. He began walking every day. And the biggest change is he started smiling again, and he had this voice tone back, and he wasn't this shy, timid guy who was, kind of confused. So when you think about the signs and symptoms, Jim presented with all of them. Mood, he was isolated, his coloring was off, he was forgetful, he was lethargic. And then after a month of eating right and eating well, he was, like I said, happy, social, energetic, not forgetful, not spacey. He even gained a few pounds, his clothes fit better, and, he ended up moving home. And it was just such a great success story. So I just wanted to end with that, just to really emphasize the importance of nutrition. So thank you all for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Steve and open the phone lines up for some questions.
All right, fantastic presentation, Molly. Thanks a lot. And it is time for the Q&A portion of today's web seminar. We've got time to squeeze a few quick questions in here. First question, Molly, can you talk about food supports and resources for older adults living on low or fixed incomes?
Yes, I think we talked about Meals on Wheels. That's probably the first resource that I would always go to. And I would check out the N4A website, because there might be some additional resources. And maybe you have to go to your local area office on aging and talk about some extra resources. I think, we gave some tips about clipping coupons in the grocery store card. It's difficult. I think, taking the time, planning and organizing, that's hard. It's hard to do. It'd be important or great if you found a friend or a neighbor or a family member that could help with that. It might go a long way, but I would check out some of those resources that we talked about on the few slides ago.
Okay, next question here. This is about the nutritional guidelines for seniors. I'm a health educator, and when I talk to family or even staff of senior health care, they mention that seniors do not need to worry about their nutrition because they are at a certain age. Although at times I do not agree with that statement, I'm curious about what you think about that statement. That's a great question. And I've had that question so many times as well. I think
what I usually say to families is, you're right, they're 80 or 90 and they can pretty much eat whatever they want. But I always go to quality of life, and I sort of make that point. It's even all of us. If we're carb loading, we're eating tons of carbs, you don't feel good. You don't feel right. You feel lethargic. You feel spacey and all those things. So it's the same with the senior. So I go to quality of life, and I go to managing symptoms. So I do say, you're right. If that person wants to eat bacon, they're 90 years old, fine. That's great. But they could feel a lot better if they either A, did it in moderation, or B, switch to turkey bacon. So I always talk about moderation. I talk about ensuring that the people or that they understand that it's about quality of life. I hope that helps, because I have that conversation all the time as well.
Okay, can you talk a little bit more about addressing loss of appetite?
Yes, that's a hard one. And